They thought he was just an old retired dog, but when Kittens began disappearing, and no one in the town dared question the man behind the mansion gates. One golden retriever, silent, loyal, and relentless, started bringing the truth home, one life at a time. And when a little autistic girl who never spoke drew the unthinkable, that's when everything changed. This isn't just about cats. It's about courage. And a dog who heard the cries. No one else could. Elkwood, Montana, wasn't the sort of place where mysteries were expected to unfold. A town framed by misty ridges and ponderosa pines, its rhythm moved slow, just like the Elk River that snaked quietly along its northern edge. The air in October had started to shift crisp with the promise of snow. Nights arrived earlier now, laced with frost that shimmered under porch lights. On these quiet streets where people trusted their neighbors and locked doors more out of habit than necessity, a single yellow porch bulb could hold back the dark. But something had changed. And it started with paws in the leaves. Tyler Granger sat in his recliner boots, still damp from a long shift patrolling the county road where deer and pickup trucks had declared seasonal war. He was a tall man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered with lines on his face that spoke of long nights and losses too deep for conversation. His blue uniform shirt was wrinkled at the elbows, the badge on his chest dulled from years of wear. Since losing his wife Danielle to cancer 3 winters ago, Tyler hadn't spoken much unless duty required it. Most of his words these days went to Cooper. Cooper was a 6-year-old golden retriever, with a thick golden coat just beginning to silver at the tips of his tail and ears. His eyes were warm brown, but intelligent. Too intelligent Tyler sometimes thought like the dog was watching him for cracks in his soul. Cooper had served as a K-9 search and rescue dog before retiring early due to a mild hip injury. Tyler had taken him in after Danielle passed, and in the silence that followed grief, the two had found an unspoken language between them. That night, as wind gusted softly through the pine branches outside, scattering dry needles across the deck, Cooper sat at the back door, tail low, ears twitching. His nose pressed to the screen like he was waiting for something. Tyler glanced over from his chair. "What is it, Coop? You just went out." The dog whined softly, then looked back at him with such purpose that Tyler stood up despite the ache in his knees. He opened the door, and Cooper was gone, vanished into the wind-chilled darkness with a flash of his golden tail. By the time Tyler stepped out with a flashlight scanning the backyard that faded into the woods, Cooper had disappeared into the night. He waited on the porch for 10 minutes, watching his breath rise in puffs. Finally, just as he turned to go back inside, there was movement. Cooper emerged from the darkness, his gait slower, careful. In his mouth, held with an impossible gentleness, was a bundle of damp orange fur. A kitten, no bigger than Tyler's hand. The dog walked straight to the back door, dropped the shivering creature onto the doormat, and looked up as if expecting praise or perhaps understanding. Tyler's breath caught in his throat. Where the hell did you find that? He knelt, reaching out. The kitten mewled faintly, soaked to the bone and trembling. Tyler could see its ribs beneath its matted fur, its tiny paws too cold to curl. "Jesus, buddy." He gathered the kitten in an old towel and brought it inside. Cooper followed but didn't rest. Instead, he paced by the door, ears perked, as if something unfinished still tugged at him. Tyler filled a small bowl with warm milk and used a plastic syringe to help the kitten drink. It was too weak to lap on its own, but it drank. The house was silent, save for the ticking of the wall clock and the kitten's faint suckling. "All right," Tyler said under his breath, placing the kitten in a box lined with flannel, probably just a stray. "Someone's barn cat, maybe. These things happen." But Cooper didn't agree. He lay beside the box all night, his body a golden wall between the kitten and the cold world beyond. The next morning, Tyler posted in the town's Facebook group, Found a kitten orange young underfed. Anyone missing one? The post sat without a single reply. That night, Cooper acted the same, restless, nervous, watching the door. Tyler stayed up this time. At 11:42 p.m., Cooper stood tail rigid and trotted to the back door. He looked once at Tyler, then again, then barked softly as if to say, "Come now." "I swear to God, dog," Tyler muttered, grabbing a jacket. He followed Cooper out into the woods behind the house, flashlight cutting through trees that creaked in the wind. After 15 minutes of walking, Cooper stopped at a cluster of brush and nosed underneath. Tyler crouched beside him. Another kitten. This one, gray and white with a streak of black over one eye. Still breathing. Still cold. Tyler lifted the kitten with both hands and turned toward Homeheart, thudding against the bone of his chest. "What are you trying to tell me, boy?" Back at the house, Cooper returned to his post beside the new kitten tail, gently swishing. Tyler fed and warmed the second kitten as best he could, then sat in silence for a long time staring at Cooper. This wasn't random, he knew it now. Cooper had purpose, and that meant something else was very, very wrong. The night in Elkwood came down fast, draped in mist and silence. Autumn had taken full hold of the little Montana town, and the wind that whispered through the pine trees carried with it a promise of frost. From his front porch, Tyler Granger watched as Cooper, his golden retriever alert and quiet, stood at the edge of the yard, nose raised to the breeze, eyes focused on something just beyond the trees. This time, Tyler didn't call him back. He simply stood, grabbed his coat, and followed in silence. Cooper moved with intent. Tyler knew that gait it wasn't wandering, it was tracking. The dog slipped between the tree trunks at the edge of Tyler's property, his golden fur flashing under the moonlight, and Tyler stayed close behind, careful not to speak or disturb the rhythm of the woods. The forest behind their homes wasn't thick, but it was enough to hide secrets, and Cooper clearly knew where he was going. After about 10 minutes of silent walking, Cooper stopped. His ears twitched forward, tail still. Tyler stepped closer and saw what lay ahead, a tall wrought iron fence, its black paint chipping with age cloaked in vines and dark leaves. Beyond it, barely visible under the sliver of moonlight, stood a sprawling estate. It was the Whitmore property. Arnold Whitmore was a name everyone in Elkwood recognized, though few had ever met the man. Now, in his 70s, Whitmore was said to be a retired pharmaceutical magnate who had bought up several acres on the edge of town and built himself a kind of mansion, part Southern manor, part fortress. People called it the Hollow House. He rarely came to town. His groceries were delivered. His vet appointments, if any, were made through anonymous calls. The only consistent fact people whispered was that he bred cats, expensive ones, rare ones. His operation was legal, or at least unproven otherwise, and always surrounded by layers of security and silence. Tyler narrowed his eyes as he scanned the fence line. Cooper paced slowly along the edge, sniffing. Then he stopped at a break in the underbrush, the faint scent of something lingering in the cold. A trace of milk animal fur. Cooper pawed at the leaves, and Tyler crouched beside him. There was nothing there now, but the ground had recently been disturbed. Flattened grass, paw prints, and what looked like a tiny scrap of dark fur. Someone or something had been there recently. Before he could investigate further, Tyler heard a sound behind him. Not a snap of branches or a voice, just a faint rustle like someone shifting their weight in the leaves. He stood quickly and turned. A girl stood a few feet away, half hidden behind the trunk of a large pine tree. She couldn't have been older than 9, pale, with long brown hair, and a jacket that hung down to her knees. She looked at Tyler only briefly before lowering her gaze to Cooper, who had already stepped forward and sat quietly, tail-tapping once on the leaves. The girl didn't speak. Instead, she took a cautious step forward and knelt beside the dog, laying a hand gently on his head. "Hi," Tyler said softly. "Didn't mean to scare you. What's your name?" She didn't answer, but she didn't run either. Tyler recognized her then, Maisie Hargrove. She lived in the blue house 2 doors down from his. He'd seen her in her front yard before, always alone, usually drawing with chalk or sitting quietly with a book. Her mother, Emily, had spoken briefly to him once at the grocery store, explaining that Maisie was on the autism spectrum and had trouble with verbal communication, especially with strangers. But here, in the shadow of the trees, Maisie looked completely calm because Cooper was there. The girl ran her fingers through the golden retriever's thick coat and smiled faintly. Cooper responded by nudging his head under her arm and leaning into her side like a protective sibling. Tyler crouched beside them. "Maisie, did you see something out here?" he asked gently. She didn't reply, but after a moment she pointed straight toward the fence. The wind howled down from the hills the next afternoon, rustling the gutters of Tyler Granger's house and bending the bare branches of the oak trees that lined Elkwood's Maple Drive. The sun was out, but it offered little warmth, and the light it cast through the kitchen window was thin and sharp, like truth breaking through doubt. Tyler stood at the counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, heating a small saucepan of milk while 3 cardboard boxes lined the floor nearby, each one carefully insulated with towels, each holding a trembling, wide-eyed kitten. The 3rd had arrived that morning. Cooper had woken him just before sunrise, whining by the back door, paws restless. Tyler hadn't hesitated. By the time they returned from the woods, the little creature, pale, cream-colored with a barely there gray stripe along its spine, was curled in Tyler's flannel shirt, breathing weakly, dehydrated, but miraculously uninjured. That made 3 kittens in 3 days, none bearing signs of trauma, yet all nearly starved or frozen. Tyler poured the warmed milk into a shallow dish and reached for the smallest dropper he had. The kittens were still too young to feed properly, and he'd learned quickly that patience mattered more than strength. He knelt gently, coaxing the newest arrival to drink, while Cooper lay beside the boxes, head resting on his paws, eyes never blinking. "You keep finding them," Tyler murmured, glancing down at his partner. "But where are they coming from?" He thought of the iron fence, the trampled grass, the strange unease that hung around Whitmore's estate like a fog no breeze could shift. He thought of Maisie, how calmly she'd walked with Cooper, how she'd pointed toward that property without saying a word, and how she seemed to carry secrets behind her silence. He needed answers, and he knew just the place to start. The Elkwood Veterinary Clinic stood at the edge of downtown, nestled between the bakery and the flower shop. A single-story brick building with hand-painted signage and a crooked wind chime hanging from the front porch, it had served the town for over 20 years. Tyler had known the woman who ran it for nearly as long. Dr. Linda Carver was a tall, lean woman in her late 50s, with silver-streaked chestnut hair, tied back in a loose braid, and eyes the color of wet slate. She wore navy scrubs under a brown utility jacket, and moved with a purposeful grace, the kind built from decades of lifting crates, calming animals, and giving bad news to good people. Linda was not easily rattled nor easily impressed. She believed in facts, data, and the quiet language of animals. Tyler respected that. When he entered the clinic holding the towel-wrapped kitten, Cooper trotting at his side, Linda looked up from the front desk with a mild frown that softened when she saw the dog. Again, she asked, rising from her stool and gesturing him toward the back room. "That's 3, Tyler." He nodded grimly. "This one's worse than the others. No injuries, just empty." Linda took the bundle with practiced hands, cradling it like something fragile and holy. She examined the kitten under soft light, listening to its chest, checking its gums, feeling the bones of its tiny ribs beneath the fur. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Severely undernourished. and dehydrated, but no trauma, no parasites I can see, just neglected. Same as the last two, Tyler asked. Linda nodded. Identical. She moved to her computer and tapped in some notes, frowning as she pulled up a screen. Then she turned the monitor toward him. I log the origin of every stray or surrendered animal that comes through here, she said. In the past year, I've had at least 6 cats come in with similar conditions. 3 of them were euthanized. They were too far gone. 2 were adopted after long recovery. 1 I had to turn away due to capacity. And look, she pointed to the address column. 5 out of 6 had been dropped off anonymously, but the one that had come with a record 6 months ago was linked to a delivery from the Whitmore estate. Tyler felt something settle hard in his chest. Linda folded her arms. You know I hate speculation, but if these kittens are somehow connected, they are, Tyler said. Cooper's been finding them. Always near that property. Linda exhaled slowly. You're not the first to raise an eyebrow about that place, but Arnold Whitmore's smart. He has lawyers, money. Everything gets buried. You say the word neglect, he sues you for defamation. Animal control barely touches it. Tyler crouched to pet Cooper, who had begun pacing near the exam table. But if we had more photos video patterns, something solid, then we'd need to talk to animal welfare at the state level. Maybe the sheriff, but be careful, Tyler. That man's got reach. He's paid off inspectors before. You remember that reporter from the Chronicle 2 years ago, Melissa Janes? She ran a story on illegal breeding rumors. Paper was threatened with a lawsuit before the ink dried. She ended up transferring to Bozeman. Tyler looked at the kitten, its breathing now slower, more even. I'm not a reporter, he said, and I'm not backing off. Linda looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. Just don't go alone. And for God's sake, keep that dog close. He seems to know what's going on better than any of us. The wind had picked up by the time Tyler knocked on the Hargrove door. The late autumn air was cold and brittle, and the trees in Elkwood swayed like slow-moving sentinels outside the quiet house. Emily Hargrove answered her expression cautious, but not unkind. She stepped aside and let Tyler in without a word, her gaze flicking down to Cooper, who trotted in at his handler's side tail, low, and eyes alert. Maisie was in the living room sitting cross-legged on the carpet with a worn sketch pad in her lap. Her colored pencils were scattered around her like petals, but she wasn't drawing. Instead, she held one piece of paper tightly in her hand, already creased and curled from having been folded and unfolded many times. When she saw Cooper, her face lit up. She didn't speak, but she got up and crossed the room, resting her hand on the dog's head with practiced ease like she always did. Cooper leaned into her touch, his body still and grounding, like he understood she needed him to anchor her when the world spun too fast. Tyler crouched nearby, close enough to speak softly. Maisie, he said, can I see what you drew? She hesitated, then looked to Cooper. The dog gave a soft whine, almost like encouragement. Maisie unfolded the paper and held it out. The drawing was rough done in dark crayon strokes, black-brown and smudged red. A stone staircase descended into what looked like a basement or cellar. Inside, wire cages lined the walls. Some held small figures curled and motionless. Others appeared empty with doors open. And in the center stood a tall man in a long coat, his face a blank circle under the shadow of a wide hood or hat. The details were childlike, but the feeling in the drawing was unmistakable. The room felt heavy, dark, and real. Tyler's jaw tensed as he took the page, studying the proportions, the lines. He had never been inside Arnold Whitmore's house, but the angles of the stairs and the stone textures looked eerily similar to what he'd seen of the estate from outside. He looked back at Maisie. "Did you see this?" She didn't answer with words. but she nodded slow, small, and sure. Emily stood in the hallway, arms folded tightly, watching with concern. She doesn't talk much about what she sees, she said, but she remembers. Everything. When she draws like this, she's trying to tell us. Maisie stepped closer to Cooper again and sat on the floor beside him. The dog lay down too, pressing against her side, his tail thudding once on the carpet. When her hand trembled, he licked it, gently grounding her again. She relaxed. She was safe. Tyler folded the drawing carefully. "I think she saw something real," he said. "Something at the Whitmore place. Something we need to understand." Emily's voice was low. "People have tried before, but no one ever listens to her." "I will," Tyler said. And so would Cooper. The sky over Elkwood had turned a deep charcoal by the time Tyler pulled his truck into the dense thicket near the southern edge of the Whitmore estate. Moonlight filtered through bare tree limbs like ghostly fingers, casting flickering shadows across the narrow dirt path. In the passenger seat, Cooper sat silently, ears forward, tail motionless. He seemed to sense that tonight was different, not a search, not a patrol, but a mission. One they wouldn't turn back from. Tyler checked his watch. 12:08 a.m. Rosalind was already inside. He glanced at the estate through a gap in the trees. The house loomed like a sleeping giant, its angular roof and brick chimney silhouetted against the pale glow of the sky. No lights showed in the windows. The place was still and cold like a museum long abandoned. Rosalind Whitaker had called him 2 nights ago. A woman in her early 60s, she had worked as a groundskeeper and domestic assistant on the Whitmore estate for over a decade. Short and round-shouldered with hands marked by calluses, and times she had a lined face framed by coarse gray curls and eyes that missed nothing. Rosalind was practical blunt and walked with a slight limp from an old injury. But what struck Tyler most was her quiet rage, sharp and focused like a blade left in a drawer too long. He let them die, she had said on the phone. He called them defects, told me to get rid of them. When I refused, he fired me and paid to shut me up, but I never forgot. Now, hidden in the trees, Tyler tapped his flashlight twice the signal. A faint flicker blinked once from the east wing. Rosalind. They moved. Cooper padded beside him, a silent shadow in golden fur. They stuck to the edges of the lawn, past the empty kennel sheds and quiet greenhouses. The estate was vast, but hollow, a place of wealth built on isolation. Tyler found the side door Rosalind had unlocked. He slipped inside. The hallway smelled of cedar and bleach. Portraits of horses lined the walls, too clean, too still. Rosalind met them near the servants' stairs, wearing a dark cardigan and rubber-soled shoes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Follow me. He's not here. He's in Bozeman for the weekend, some gala." She led them down the narrow staircase, pausing at the landing. She pulled a ring of keys from her pocket and unlocked the thick door to the basement. "He keeps it locked," she muttered. "Says it's for security, but I know better." The basement stairs groaned under their weight. At the bottom, the air turned damp and heavy with a sour smell. Tyler couldn't place old urine mildew and something colder. Rosalind switched on a single light bulb hanging from a cord. It cast a yellowish pool of light onto a concrete floor. Against the far wall stood 3 large iron cages. Inside, 6 kittens huddled together in one corner, too weak to mule their fur, matted and dull. One of them, a gray tabby, lifted its head sluggishly and blinked at the light. Tyler stepped closer and dropped to one knee. "God, they're alive," he breathed. "Barely." Cooper whined low in his throat. Then he saw it. Next to the cages stood a large porcelain tub, old claw-footed, clean and white. Too clean. Beside it, a 5-gallon plastic bucket filled halfway with water. Several folded towels lay on a shelf above it. Neat, intentional, prepared. Tyler's jaw clenched. This isn't just neglect. This was planned. Rosalind nodded grimly. He waits until they're old enough, then decides. If they're not perfect eye-color tail-length weight, he says they can't be sold. Then he uses that, she said, gesturing toward the tub, her voice trembling for the first time to make sure no one asks questions later. Tyler stood and moved toward the cages. He reached through the bars, gently lifting one of the kittens. Its ribs were sharp under its fur, but it didn't resist. It just curled into his hand like it had already learned that no one was coming. Rosalind stepped back. I couldn't stop it then, but I want to help now. Tyler nodded once. You just did. He turned to Cooper. We're getting them out. The morning broke over Elkwood in a haze of silver mist and brittle frost. Tyler Granger stood on his back porch, a worn flannel shirt wrapped around his shoulders, watching Cooper pace along the tree line. The golden retriever moved like a creature pulled by instinct, eyes sharp nose low to the ground, tail stiff with purpose. It had been hours since they returned from the Whitmore estate, but Cooper hadn't rested. Not really. Something inside him still burned. Tyler could feel it too. Inside the house, 6 kittens now lay in 2 large carriers lined with fleece blankets, their thin bodies slowly warming under the soft hum of a space heater. Tyler had taken them straight from Whitmore's basement and cleaned them one by one, checking each for injuries, keeping his voice low and calm while Cooper lay nearby like a silent guardian. None of the kittens had the energy to cry. Tyler's phone buzzed on the windowsill. He picked it up and saw the caller ID, Dr. Linda Carver. Tyler. Her voice came through grim without greeting. You need to come down here. He didn't ask questions. 20 minutes later, he stood in the back room of Elkwood Veterinary Clinic, the sterile smell of disinfectant clinging to the air. Linda, in her pale blue scrubs, and with her hair tied into a messy braid, stood beside a steel examination table. On the table lay a small motionless kitten, orange-furred eyes, sunken fur patchy around its ribs. Its chest no longer rose. This one was dropped off anonymously last night, Linda said quietly. No tags, no carrier. Just left in a blanket at the back door. It didn't make it. Tyler leaned in, heart sinking. Sodium imbalance, extreme dehydration, and starvation. Linda continued. But here's what's worse. She turned her computer screen toward him, displaying side-by-side photos, one of the kitten now, and another taken a month ago. Same markings, same tail kink. It's one of the cats we treated last month, from Whitmore's address. I have the paperwork. Tyler didn't speak. Rage pressed hot behind his teeth, but he swallowed it down. Linda glanced at him, her slate-colored eyes tired. What are we doing about this? We're getting proof, Tyler said. Real proof. He returned home with the weight of the morning heavy on his chest, only to find Rosalind already waiting on his porch. She sat on the swing, hunched in a worn gray coat, her breath visible in the crisp air. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp, resolute. I found something, she said without preamble, standing and digging into the canvas bag beside her. I should have handed it over a long time ago, but I was scared and ashamed. She held out a small black USB drive. It's from the office computer, she said. Before I left, I copied files, photos, invoices, emails. He thought he deleted everything, but he never emptied the drive folder. I kept it just in case. I couldn't throw it away. Tyler took the device, his fingers cold. What's on it? Rosalind hesitated. Pictures of the cats, before and after, shipment logs. He sells them online, rare breeds, manipulated genetics. Sometimes even fakes papers to pass mixed breeds as pure. When they don't match his standards, they disappear. Tyler's stomach turned, but he gave a short nod. "You're doing the right thing." "I hope so," she said. "I'm just sorry I didn't do it sooner." Inside, Tyler sat at his desk and plugged in the USB drive. Cooper stood beside him, unmoving as the screen filled with folders, litter, records, photos, shucked, confidential exports, client logs. He clicked through the images first. Dozens of photos, cats in steel crates, some clearly sick, others marked with red X's on their fur or crates. Some images were labeled with dates and prices. Others were less clinical photos of drowned kittens still wet, laid out on cold tile. Tyler's hand tightened into a fist. Then came the documents. Export records to addresses across the state. Unregulated litters. Falsified health certificates. Several files showed incoming payments from suspicious accounts. It was enough to make a case. But it wasn't enough for justice. Cooper whined suddenly. He stood at the back door, tail stiff, eyes locked on something outside. "What is it, boy?" Tyler followed him to the window. The woods were still. But the dog didn't relax. Tyler didn't question it anymore. He grabbed his coat, a flashlight, and followed Cooper out. They crossed the backyard, then moved through the woods. Cooper didn't run. He moved with intent, not speed. They circled toward the south, where Tyler had never followed before. It took nearly 20 minutes through dense brush and uneven ground, but then Cooper stopped. Near the base of a hollowed tree was another bundle. Wrapped in a fraying towel half buried under leaves was a kitten, this one black with a white chest. It was breathing barely, eyes sealed shut. No more than a few weeks old. Cooper sat beside it and let out a low, mournful whine. Tyler scooped up the kitten, wrapped it in his scarf, and whispered, "How many more?" As they returned through the darkening trees, Tyler knew what he had to do. This wasn't just about cats anymore. It was about cruelty, silence, and the people who looked away. But not Cooper, not anymore. The sky over Elkwood was a deep, bruised blue by the time Tyler Granger parked his unmarked SUV beneath the cover of trees on the north side of the Whitmore property. The air was dense with the stillness that preceded a storm, though not a drop had fallen. Cooper sat beside him in the passenger seat, wearing the padded harness he hadn't needed since his days in active canine service. His golden fur shimmered in the fading light, but his eyes were focused and steady. There was no wag in his tail, no panting. He was waiting. Across the dash lay a handheld camcorder, a compact thermal scope, and a digital recorder clipped to Tyler's chest. Everything was charged. Everything was ready. Tyler had filed the necessary preliminary evidence with state authorities earlier that day. Photos from the USB Rosalind had given him invoices showing illegal genetic trafficking and testimonies from both her and Dr. Linda Carver. But there was one thing missing: live proof. In the world of justice, documentation meant little if it didn't catch a man in the act. Tonight, that would change. An hour before, Rosalind had contacted Tyler in a whisper from a borrowed phone. She'd returned briefly to the estate under the pretense of retrieving old belongings and spotted signs that another culling was being prepared. Water drawn in the utility sink, towels missing from the laundry, one crate left open beside the mudroom. Whitmore was home, and he was planning to clean house. Tyler clipped on the recorder and adjusted the scope. He looked at Cooper. "You ready?" Cooper's ears twitched. Then he moved. They crossed the lawn in the shadows sticking to the hedges along the east side of the estate. Tyler knew the patrol routes from past observation. 2 hired guards rotated shifts, but neither were trained. They were bodies, not professionals. Whitmore relied more on walls and fear than vigilance. The basement door was still unlocked. Rosalind had made sure of that. Inside, the house was eerily quiet. Faint, classical music played somewhere upstairs, likely from a record player. Tyler moved down the servants' staircase with practiced steps, Cooper behind him barely making a sound. The basement was dimly lit, the single bulb swinging slightly as if recently disturbed. Tyler's breath caught as he saw them 4 kittens in a wire crate near the center of the room, barely old enough to stand. Their fur was wet in places as though they'd been rinsed. The white tub beside the sink had water in it. A pair of thick gloves and a folded towel lay on a nearby bench. Then came footsteps. From the far side of the room, the heavy sound of boots descending wooden stairs. Tyler ducked behind a support column and motioned to Cooper, who slid behind a shelf and crouched low, motionless. Arnold Whitmore entered wearing a heavy brown coat despite the warmth of the room. In his mid-70s, Whitmore was tall and lean, with thinning white hair combed meticulously back. His jaw was sharp, clean-shaven, and his movements deliberate. In his hand, he carried a small black bag. A hose protruded slightly from the top. He set the bag on the table, then reached for the gloves. Tyler pressed the button on his recorder. Whitmore muttered to himself as he pulled the gloves on something about bad genetics and incomplete litters. He stepped toward the crate. Then came the growl, low, steady, from the shadows. Whitmore froze. Cooper emerged slowly, teeth-bared body poised, not aggressive, but immovable, a wall of muscle and gold fur between Whitmore and the crate. But the Whitmore recoiled, stumbling back into the sink. Tyler stepped out. "Step away from the animals," he said calmly, his badge now visible on his belt. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "You don't have a warrant." "I don't need one," Tyler said. "You're in the act. And you've been recorded." Whitmore's smirk twisted. "You think anyone's going to believe a stray cop and his pet mutt I own half the town?" "Not anymore," Tyler said, lifting the camcorder. "The FBI is already reviewing your exports. You're done." Whitmore lunged, not at Tyler, but for the camera. He never made it. Cooper launched forward, intercepting him with precision. He didn't bite, just rammed into the man's legs with a practiced force that knocked Whitmore to the ground. The man let out a startled grunt as the wind left his lungs. Tyler was on him in seconds, flipping him over and cuffing him. Whitmore struggled, but his age showed. He had no strength to fight. "You'll pay for this," Whitmore hissed. "No," Tyler replied. "You will." Cooper stood beside the crate as Tyler read Whitmore his rights. The kittens, though too weak to mew, huddled behind the metal bars watching the golden figure that had kept them safe. Elkwood awoke that spring with something it hadn't felt in years: ease. The snow that had buried the hills and rooftops through winter had long melted into the soil, coaxing out wild crocuses and the scent of wet pine. The streets hummed with the quiet rhythm of a town returning to itself. Porch lights shone a little warmer. Shopkeepers smiled a little longer, and in the center of it all, just beyond the town square, stood the Elkwood Public Library, its doors flung open for the first book signing it had ever hosted. Inside, under strings of paper lanterns and sunbeams pouring through the high windows, Tyler Granger sat behind a table, stacked with copies of a small, unassuming book, Voices in the Dark. On the cover, a single silhouette, Cooper, standing on a wooded ridge, his head turned toward distant light. It was his story, Tyler's words, and the town's reckoning. Across the room, Cooper lay near the fireplace on a soft rug, a blue silk ribbon tied gently around his collar. He was 8 now, his golden fur thick, but showing silver around the muzzle and tail. His eyes, though softened with age, still held the same steady focus that had carried him through the darkest nights. Kids came in waves to pet him, whispering their thanks, or simply sitting beside him in silence, as if his presence alone made them braver. And in the front row sat Maisie. The little girl wore a yellow dress that matched her rain boots, her brown hair braided to one side. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, a drawing tucked beneath one arm. At her side, her mother Emily kept a watchful, loving eye, but there was a new lightness in her shoulders, a quiet pride. Maisie leaned forward as Tyler stood to speak. When I started writing this, Tyler said tapping the book's cover, I didn't plan to publish it. I just wanted to understand what we'd all been through. But the truth was, I needed to hear Cooper's voice, and maybe so did the rest of us. He paused, then looked at Maisie. She was the first to hear it, and when no one else listened, she kept drawing. She never stopped trying. Maisie blinked her eyes, big and unblinking. Her fingers tightened around the paper in her lap. She said her first word the day Cooper came to visit her school Emily had told Tyler just a week ago. It wasn't a full sentence, just a whisper, but it was clear. She had said Cooper. Now, after the speech and the applause, Maisie rose from her seat and walked with quiet confidence to the front table. She held out her drawing. Tyler took it with both hands. It showed Cooper standing beside 3 kittens, each colored carefully, one orange, one black, one gray, with a little girl watching from a window. The sky above was a swirl of stars. In the corner, written in uneven block letters, was a title, Home. "Thank you," Tyler said, kneeling to her height. "Do you know what this is going to become?" Maisie shook her head gently. "It's going to be the mural at Maisie's shelter." Behind them, the projector screen displayed a slideshow of the new facility. The town had voted unanimously to grant land outside the city for the purpose, and funds raised from Tyler's book had more than covered the construction costs. A soft yellow building surrounded by fenced pastures and sunlit rooms would soon open its doors to rescued cats across the state, those that had no voice, no home, and no protection. It would be called Maisie's Shelter. Rosalind stood near the entrance, her posture straighter than anyone remembered. She wore a navy blue jacket and jeans, her gray hair now clipped short and stylish. Since Whitmore's conviction on charges ranging from animal cruelty to fraud and illegal trafficking, she'd not only been publicly exonerated, but offered a role as the shelter's operations director. She had accepted, of course. With her steady hands and hard-earned wisdom, she'd become something of a town matriarch. Tyler hadn't returned to active patrol. After the trial, he'd taken a quieter role, community liaison officer, still wearing the badge, but more often seen organizing fundraisers or stopping by the clinic with supplies. He no longer drove the county roads alone. His house, once silent and still, was now full of movement and soft meows, because Tyler had adopted 3 of the kittens he and Cooper had saved that night. Junebug, the shy gray tabby who now followed him like a shadow. Marshmallow, the snow-white one who slept curled between Cooper's paws. And Radar, the orange rascal who had learned how to open cabinet doors and had done so with impunity. They belonged now. Not just to Tyler, but to Elkwood. And Cooper. He had become a symbol. Outside the police station now stood a bronze plaque in honor of Cooper, who heard the voices no one else could. Children left drawings by it in spring, flowers in summer, and in winter someone always wrapped it in a scarf. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with thunder or trumpets. They walk in quietly on 4 paws, with gentle eyes and unwavering loyalty. In a world that too often ignores the voiceless, it was a dog named Cooper, who listened, who acted, who stood between cruelty and compassion. Through him, justice found a way, not through power, but through love. And perhaps that is how God speaks most clearly, not in shouts, but in stillness. In a child who finally whispers a name. In the warmth of a kitten no longer afraid. In the quiet courage of those who refuse to look away. This story reminds us that we are called to protect what is small, to defend what is fragile, and to speak even when others are silent. That sometimes heaven works through paws instead of hands. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes that kindness still matters. Comment below with your thoughts and subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope and healing. And if you believe that God still works miracles through His creations, through dogs like Cooper and children like Maisie, leave a prayer below. Comment Amen if you believe that even the smallest voice deserves to be heard. May God bless you and every soul you care for.